Mass immigration is destroying Canada, but not in the way you might think. It is obvious that high immigration has contributed to the housing crisis we have in Canada. However, mass immigration is not just leading to a housing crisis and making Canada more expensive for Canadians, it's going to make Canada more dangerous and it's going to destroy the social fabric of our society. Before I explain to you why this is the case, we need to ask ourselves, why do people come to Canada in the first place? And for me, this mainly boils down to two different groups of people. People that want a better life and people that want to come here and make more money. When I say someone wants a better life, I'm using this as a holistic term to describe all refugees, asylum seekers, and basically anyone fleeing poverty or any other type of danger in their home country. And when I say people want to make money, I'm simply referring to economic migrants. When we quickly break down Canada's immigrant population, only about 1/3 of people that came to Canada in 2022 were refugees, which means most of the people coming into Canada are economic migrants. And the reality is, people coming to Canada, for whatever reason, are inevitably going to have less respect for our culture or they're going to have a very difficult time assimilating to our culture. The or here is very important because I do think there's going to be a lot of economic migrants and refugees that come here that do have some appreciation for Canadians and Canadian culture for allowing them to come here. However, I do think a lot of refugees and asylum seekers have a very hard time assimilating because often they're not going to speak English to a high degree, and two, they're coming from countries that have very different value systems than the one we have here in Canada. And then we have the rest of the economic migrants. Now again, this isn't a blanket statement because obviously some economic migrants are going to respect our culture and appreciate Canada for allowing them to come here and work. But it's ridiculous for us to assume that even a majority of them are going to respect our culture and society when they're coming here solely to make money. And this isn't even the first choice for a lot of them. For a lot of people coming here right now, they want to get into the US or other countries, but because it's very difficult for them to get into those countries, they decide to come here instead. We're going to talk about this a bit more in depth later, but first, let's look at some of the safest countries in the world. There's always going to be a difference in ranking depending on which variables are considered, but for the most part, 3 of the top 10 countries are always Iceland, Denmark, and Japan. And one of the similarities between these 3 countries is that they're all fairly homogenous. Japan has an immigrant population of less than 3%, Denmark is less than 8%, and Iceland is a bit higher, around 12%. But when you consider Iceland has a population of like 400,000 people, it makes sense that this percentage is going to be higher, even though the raw number is going to be quite small. Also, most of the immigrants going to Iceland are from other European countries and not from the Middle East or Asia. Now, obviously, there's a lot of factors that contribute to the safety and social cohesion of a society, but it is very obvious that shared language, values, and religion play a big role in this. After all, it doesn't take a genius to see what can happen when you have groups of people that don't share these things living in close proximity with one another. And out of the 3 countries that I talked about, I find Denmark to be the most interesting. During the middle of the 2010s, mainly from 2013 to 2016, Denmark had a massive increase in refugees coming to the country. What Denmark realized is that this massive increase in immigration was leading to problems with social cohesion. Since then, with support from both sides of the political spectrum, Denmark has drastically cut immigration, making it incredibly difficult to get refugee status and claim asylum. Not only that, Denmark is now forcing immigrant children who live in a neighborhood that has a high population of immigrants to go to Danish school to learn the language and learn the culture every week. And they have to do this because the Danish government realized in order for these immigrant children to successfully grow up and integrate into the society, they need to have a native level grasp of the language, and they need to learn about the cultures and values that Denmark has. And this is something the Danish government thinks is necessary because in these neighborhoods where these children live, since there are so many other immigrants, the Danish government doesn't believe these children are going to be exposed to these morals, values, and obviously the language to a high enough degree. Essentially, Denmark has deemed the assimilation of immigrants, at least to some degree, crucial for social order. And another thing working in the favor of countries like Japan and Denmark is that since it is now so difficult to immigrate there, the people that successfully get their visas and get to go there more than often want to be there for more than just economic reasons. This is what we would call intrinsic motivation compared to the extrinsic motivation of just wanting to make a ton of money. And by default, someone with intrinsic motivation is going to be more likely to learn the language and assimilate to the culture. But unfortunately, That's not the reality for Canada. Like I said before, most people coming to Canada are economic migrants and they're coming here just to make money. Now I'll say here, I have zero issue with people relocating to Canada. We are unbelievably blessed to have been born and raised in Canada where bombs weren't being dropped on us, where there was equal rights for everyone under the law, where we have clean air and the country is relatively safe. That said, just because I don't fault people for coming here to pursue a better life doesn't mean I'm going to give people a pass for coming here, refusing to adopt our culture and values, and hold on to things from their old country that don't align with what we do here. Now previously, this wasn't a huge concern when we had less people coming in, but now that the immigrant population is over 20%, with the government wanting it to reach 30% within the next decade, this is becoming a larger issue. In the past, society was a bit easier at policing itself and, in a sense, keeping people in line. And what I mean by this is, in the past, if you saw someone doing something inappropriate or wrong, you would speak up and say something about it, which is something that a lot of people don't do now. And just like there is in a lot of other parts of the world, including places like Denmark and Japan, there used to be a pressure for people to actually act appropriately out in public. And the larger problem now is that in a lot of cities like Brampton and Toronto, since a lot of neighborhoods have such a high population of immigrants, things that would have been checked 20, 30 years ago by other Canadians are going unchecked and accepted because there's so many other people who share that similar culture and value because they come from the same country. And I'm not trying to say that Canadian culture or Western culture in general is the best, because obviously it's not. What I'm simply saying is we're currently in Canada. We are not in India. We are not in China. We are not even in Europe or South America. If you are coming here, you should be willing to adopt the cultures and values that Canadians have. Now, some people might try and argue against this and point to the fact that Canada's always had a high number of immigrants, and that's true. However, we're now reaching a point where the immigration level is so high, we've never actually seen these numbers before, and that's only going to continue to climb as time progresses. But more importantly, the immigrants coming to Canada now are vastly different from the immigrants of the past. For those of you not aware, the top 5 countries for immigration to Canada now are 1, India, 2, China, 3, Afghanistan, 4, Nigeria, and 5, the Philippines. You're going to have a very hard time finding things that the average Canadian, Chinese, Indian, Nigerian, Afghani, and Filipino agree on. For the most part, we don't share the same language, we don't eat the same food, we don't have the same religion, and we don't share the same cultural values. Now contrast this to decades back, where most of Canadians' immigration population was coming from places like the UK and Western Europe. In those times, although the immigration rate was still quite high, it was easier for these people to assimilate to our society because there was either an overlap in language, which we had with Britain, there was an overlap in religion, mainly Christianity, or there was overlap in values between Western Europe and Canada. And obviously, this is something we don't have today because a lot of people are coming from countries that aren't Western Europe and the UK. Also back then, there was a much higher rate of nationalism among the public, meaning that there was more pride in your country and, in a sense, more pressure to conform to the culture and values of that country. And I'm not saying everything's better now, because in a lot of ways, things have improved for immigrants coming to Canada, and the reality is they needed to. But the problem is, we can't even have a conversation about this anymore because it's considered racist and xenophobic. And I want to make this point very clear. This doesn't just apply to immigrants coming to Canada. This also applies to Canadians leaving for other countries. We have seen tons of Canadians, especially in response to COVID, leave for places like Mexico, Asia, and other parts of Europe. And if you want to leave, all the power to you. That said, if you're not willing to adopt the culture and values of the country you want to move to, don't move there. Want to live in Mexico? Learn Spanish. Want to live in Costa Rica? Don't expect people to show up on time. Want to live in Japan? You better learn your kanji and you better put a mask on. To me, it's just a massive middle finger to the people of the country you're moving to if you're not planning to learn their language, culture, and values. But again, let's remind ourselves what's happening in Canada is not the fault of any individual person, because there are hundreds of thousands of good immigrants that come here. They respect our culture. They contribute positively. A lot of them are doctors and physicians and business owners that employ people. So a lot of them contribute in ways that I definitely can't contribute, and we need to appreciate those people because they're very important to our society. And even though there are a lot of people that come here just to make money and they could care less about Canada and the people here, we can't blame those people for coming. If there's anyone to blame, we need to blame Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government of Canada. After all, they're the ones making these policies. I guess we could also mention that the NDP at this point is also semi-responsible for this, since their votes are essentially propping up the Liberal government and keeping them in office until 2024. 2025. And unfortunately, if the current immigration system continues, which it will, it's going to degenerate into something that most Canadians can't even recognize, let alone want to participate in. What can we do about this? Well, for starters, I think we actually need to acknowledge that we have a problem here. However, I don't think this is going to happen for 3 reasons. 1, there are a lot of people in Canada that still don't believe we have a problem with our immigration system. 2, none of the politicians are going to touch this because it's political suicide. And 3, the Canadians that actually agree on this position or think that we need less immigration are afraid to speak out, mainly because we live in a woke society where if you say the wrong thing and the wrong person sees it, you could be out of a job. But again, this is just my opinion on the issue. If you have a different opinion or you want to share your thoughts, comment sections down below. If you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a friend. And with that said, thanks for watching. Stay safe wherever you are in the world, and I'll catch you in the next one.